You're listening to another episode of the Coaster101 podcast. I'm Andrew Stillwell, and I have pulled our podcast out of the submarine that Nick recorded in last week with Matt from Print My Ride. But really great episode if you have not listened. A lot of good information about Print My Ride and all the stuff Matt's worked on. But this week, I am joined by another member of the Coaster101 team, Eric Woolley, out on the West Coast. Eric, how are you today?
Hi, Andrew. I'm okay. I'm getting over a cold, so I apologize to everyone for sounding stuffed up, but I sound better than Nick did last week, so that should be okay.
Yeah, it's all good. And, 'tis the season for colds. I think I would have joined Nick on the show last week if I was not under the weather. But again, we're back. We're better than ever. We're after our several-week break because real life gets in the way sometimes of podcasts, but the good news is Eric and I, even Eric being out on the West Coast, we've both visited, albeit separately, a park recently, and we've gotten to ride a new for 2022 roller coaster, and that is Pantheon. Eric, I think everybody listening to our podcast probably has a general idea of what Pantheon is, but for those who may or may not know, who happen upon this podcast because they went to college with me and don't like roller coasters, why don't you tell the folks about Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg?
There are other people. I mean, I actually did a really good job. So I went to Busch Gardens Williamsburg a little over a week ago, and I did a good job of not knowing too much about Pantheon before going, other than that you liked it. So new Intamin multi-launch coaster. I think it's the fastest multi-launch coaster now in the world. Originally supposed to open back in 2020, I think, and then got delayed like everything. Opened in March, early April, late March, I think. Mm-hmm. So that you wrote it very early on. So it opened this year. It's kind of got it's a pretty unique ride. It's 4 launches total, and that includes a reverse launch that there's I guess if we want to get into the layout of the ride, it sort of starts with go out of the station, starts with one launch and go through one inversion kind of right away. And then you get on kind of a long straightaway with a launch and launches you forward up into a top hat, but then has an intentional rollback. And so meanwhile, while you're going up the top hat, there's a switch track behind you that switches from the track that goes out of the entrance to another path to roll backwards out of the top hat and then go up a very tall vertical spike. And so you get an extra backward launch into that. Come down the vertical spike, get launched again. This time you make it over the top hat and then go through the rest of the ride. So it's a very unique setup there with the switch track, but a switch track coming out of a actual rollback and not a situation where you're being held in a showroom or something like on Expedition Everest or Fire Chaser Express or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it is definitely unique. And you mentioned there are 4 launches, but there's only 2 sets of the LIM LSM launch, LIM, LSM, whatever they are, the magnetic launches. And you traverse one of those sections 3 times. You go forward up the top hat, backwards up a vertical spike, and then you hit that top speed of 73 miles an hour, which again is good enough to classify Pantheon as the world's fastest multi-launch roller coaster. Eric, you've ridden it a little bit more recently than I have. And again, you mentioned you went in completely blind, but what were your overall thoughts of the, Pantheon as a whole, and kind of talk a little bit about your experience riding it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd be curious if you agree on this. I think my take after the first, so I rode it 3 times on my trip, different times during the day. I happened to be there on a weekday when the park was only open from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., which is turns out a very slow day at the park. So there were not large crowds, easy to ride everything, even with only 6 hours in the park. My first thought on the first ride was it felt very much like a Rocky Mountain construction coaster, which I think I could tell through this ride the influence that RMC has had on coaster design. Even at the very opening of the ride, it's sort of you come out of the station, there's kind of this like little turn, and then the track kind of banks left and right and sort of swings you a little back a bit before putting you into the first launch. And that was like, I feel like the other coaster that I know that I thought of that does that is Twisted Colossus. And similarly, the elements. So there's I think it's called Breaking Wave Turn or something. It's basically a big hill with where the track banks sort of outward to like a full 90-degree bank before it's setting you back. And that's like one that I've seen on RMC coasters. There's a 0G stall where you kind of hang upside down for a while in the middle, which is again something that like I think Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom that I'm familiar with does too. And so that was like my first reaction was like, oh, this is like, it's a steel coaster and very much an Intamin, but is pulling from RMC elements, which is kind of the first time I've seen that from a different manufacturer.
Yeah, I noticed that too. And again, these are not I wouldn't call them like cookie cutter inversions or elements or anything like that. I mean, again, you mentioned you come right out of that first launch, you kind of meander out of the station as Busch Gardens roller coasters do. You hit this launch, and then you launch into this weird banana roll. I think it's called a 0G winder, is what RCDB calls it, which, again, we're just making up names here at this point. But the hang time on that was fantastic. I didn't know it felt fast because you were coming out of a launch, but you had a lot of just slow roll hang time, and then the bank turns before you hit that first launch up the top hat. I mean, it was really, really good. And I remember taking a construction tour right before the world ended in January of 2020.
Yeah.
The world ended in March, but I took the tour in January. It is so low to the ground. Like, there is a picture, and we put it on Twitter last week as a little bit of a joke to dunk on Inside the Magic. Sorry, not really. But, you're like 5 feet off the ground at some of those points. And it's just, it's really, really good use of the terrain. And, it is just, there's a lot going on in such a kind of compact, it's not a ton of track. I don't want to say it's less than 2,500 feet. I could be wrong there. Don't come for me. I'll read the stats later, but
it looks like it's 3,300 feet.
Okay. Close enough. Anyway.
But yeah, that's vertical.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in such a small space. But I've got to ask you, you rode 3 times. Where did you ride on the coaster as far as rows?
So the first ride I did was towards the front. It was, I think, like row 3 or 4. And then the second ride was in the back seat, and the last ride I took at night was in like the second to last row.
Gotcha.
So I tried to cover a mix.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite spot?
Well, my favorite spot was the one spot I got to ride. I actually I only rode it one time, but I did. I rode it in the back row, and it was really good. And then there's a really long story that involves my like Pantheon saga the day I was at the park. I was at the park on a Friday. I take that back. I was at the park on a Saturday, and I was going to rope drop it just because that's what you do when a new coaster opens. You rope drop the new coaster. And Busch Gardens Williamsburg opens in stages. So the main gate, like the entrance gate, opens at like 9:30 or whatever, and then they kind of corral everyone right in front of Loch Ness Monster, and the different hamlets or neighborhoods or whatever the park calls them opens in 15-minute increments. So like if you want to go to Ireland and do Finnegan's Flyer or over to New France, those open pretty early. But Festa Italia, it wasn't open until like 10:15 or 10:30. So the first rope drop, everybody takes off at a dead sprint, and they make it not 50 feet before the train gates between Loch Ness Monster and Pompeii. There's a Skyride train or a Skyride station right in that vicinity. They're down. So these people just take off at a dead sprint. I wasn't quite at like Trackstar sprint, but I was like, okay, I'm going to just take a walk. And then lo and behold, walk around the corner and there's nothing, like nobody's moving again. So we go, And we go and we go and we wait. And we finally get the green light to go to Festa Italia where Pantheon is. And I learned by talking to people who had come to the park several days prior that week, it had its issues earlier in the week. There were some issues with wind and, given launches and the reputation of launch coasters. And, there's a certain subset of the coaster community who's like, ugh, Intaments. They don't know how to ever work properly when they open. And it's like, okay, well, anyway, it's machines and things like that. So anyway, I get there. It's, 10:30 or whatever at this point, and Pantheon's closed. And, coming up from North Carolina, I've been to Busch Gardens dozens of times at this point. I've ridden everything. I was going to ride Pantheon if it killed me that day. And so I'm standing in line, and Pantheon is down. And, they've got it over the loudspeaker. And it's like, we recommend you ride Tempesto or Apollo's Chariot or whatever the teacups are. Just kind of on repeat. And there was a small group of people, I feel like Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and I think you mentioned this when we were talking when you were at the park. It's a park that a lot of enthusiasts are going to right now. Like I was in line with a bunch of ACE members, and maybe because we're the only ones stubborn enough to wait out a breakdown, like everyone was taught, like this old guy, he was riding his 800th coaster or something like that, 800, 1200. It was some milestone that was a lot higher than what I had. But anyway, we're waiting. And then they bring out this A-frame sign that said, "This coaster will not open today." And I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. And I was texting you guys, and I was like, I'm going to jump off the train over the Rhine River Bridge. This is just just to be clear, I wasn't ever actually going to do that. It was hyperbole. But it was really frustrating to, drive up from North Carolina, have one day at Busch Gardens and see that. But there was a lot of cycling, a lot of activity going on. So I was like, well, we're just going to wait it out, because you know what? If they're continuously cycling trains, there's going to be good stuff that happens. And then I feel like I ended up waiting pretty close to 2 hours just by that finger pointed sign, the logo sign out in front before you cross that bridge. And I was waiting with this dad and his daughter, and there was this, this younger guy, probably early 20s, but it was the four of us. We waited out the entire 2 hours just shot the shit and just were talking. And they eventually removed the A-frame, and I was like, well, that's a good sign. And so we go. And I have a backpack, because I'm one of those people who has to carry all my things in a backpack. And by the time they opened the coaster, the lockers, they hadn't even opened the lockers yet. The lockers were still covered up. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go. I'm not going to get stuck in this line by paying for a locker.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go, because the lockers aren't going. And so I get up to the sign, and they stop me. They're like, you can't take a bag. I was like, look right over there. The lockers are not unlocked. You still have tarps over the locker screen. And he goes, well, I gotta have to call somebody. I was like, okay, fine. So I don't recommend doing this. And you know what? I had my keys and my wallet and everything in my bag. I threw it behind the ride sign. I was like, you know what? I don't have time to go back and wait in a locker, because the line had built up to, hundreds of people at this point, and they were all behind me, and they're like, hey, what's going on? So I was just like, okay, fine. I threw my bag where nobody could see it. And I went, and I got on the first train of the day in the back row. Amazing ride, amazing experience. And so I was like, okay, fine. We're going to go back around. I'm going to, pay for my rent all day locker, which I did. And I went, and I throw my stuff in the locker, and I went back, and it was a 25-minute wait at this point. And I was like, yeah. And again, I am somebody who is a larger coaster enthusiast. I have been walked off my fair share, and I feel like I've mentioned it a bunch on this show, but I rode the first time, had no issues. And so I was like, okay, I'm good. I fit. Going to the gym has worked out. and I'm, pun intended, it has worked out for me right now, and I can ride. And so I go and I'm going to have my second ride on the third row or whatever. And for whatever reason, the sensor won't engage or trigger or whatever the engineering term is for a sensor. And so I got walked the second time after riding the first time, which to me was absurd at the time. I'm really glad I got that first row or that first ride in the back row, but I have no idea how it happened. I didn't gain a sudden amount of weight in the 25 minutes in between rides, but yeah,
you didn't drink a whole bunch of beer between those rides.
Drink 0 beers. There was no. The only thing different was that I had paid for a locker at this point, so it was like egg on my face a little bit. But I mean, I did use it throughout the day, so it wasn't a big deal. And just a side note: parks that require lockers for rides and don't offer the buy one price and then use it the rest of the day, please do that. That is the most genius thing. Like, I have no issue paying $5 and just moving my locker throughout the day.
Yeah,
it's not a big deal. And again, I would have paid for the locker to begin with, but it was desperate times, desperate measures to start the day. But I got my one ride in the back row, and ascending up that vertical spike in the back row was just unbelievable. I cannot say enough good things about the design of this coaster. And the one back row ride I had, because I wasn't going to try it again, because by the time I got out of line the second time, the line was up to 75 minutes and I wasn't, I had came to ride it. I rode it. I had a really, really good ride, but I wasn't going to wait 75 minutes to get walked a second time. It's just, I'm stubborn enough to wait 2 hours the first time, but I'm not gonna tempt fate again. But yeah, it was so good. Did you have a favorite element or moment on the coaster?
I think that there's something like very much there aren't a ton of moments on coasters that like make me feel nervous or feel like I need to hold on to. But there's something about going up the top hat and then rolling back where like obviously the track will have switched and like there are so many fail safes built into this, and like I can tell that there are ways that would do it where like, okay, the launch LSMs are in braking mode until like the track has made the change and stuff, but you're still like rolling back and then being launched backwards into a track that wasn't there before is like causes a little bit of nerve. And so that is like very exciting from a nervousness point. And then, like you said, I mean, being towards the back of a train, going up a vertical spike is great on any ride. I love them on Schwarzkopf shuttle loops like Montezuma's Revenge at Knott's Berry Farm, or the like impulse coasters like Vertical Velocity and whatever it's called now at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, Flash. Like being in the back, just like going up backwards high up a spike where then you like don't know where the end of the track is always exciting. I think other than those, I do like the again, I forget the breaking wave turn, whatever. The big like
wave turn,
wave turn, where it's like banks outwards, especially here because it's like you're kind of above the river, and so like it banks very much to the outside. And then I'd second what you mentioned earlier of the like how much it's low to the ground, and like I think that is always exciting on a coaster, and I think Busch Gardens Williamsburg in particular does this really well on lots of their coasters, of making the coaster exciting by having it stay near the terrain, and so that adds to it. I think those would be my top ones. I know you had a post on the site of your top elements. What stood out most to you?
I did. And there, here's the cheap Coaster101.com plug. We've got a story that I wrote. There was 6 of the most surprising elements on Pantheon. And of course I couldn't limit it to 6. So there is a 7th on there. But the vertical top hat was kind of an honorable mention for me. They're great. What you don't realize is that when you finally do clear the top hat itself, is it a 95-degree drop? So again, to me, there's not that much difference between, especially as you're going over it slowly, there's not that much difference between 90 and 95 degrees. I know there are other roller coasters out there that go beyond vertical, by several degrees. Icebreaker's one, Maverick's another one that,
yeah,
you kind of feel it a little bit, but it's really good.
I feel like I didn't actually even notice that it was more than 90 degrees. And I wonder maybe if I were in the front seat, I would notice more, but I don't know. It was something like at that point, the most exciting things have happened before the top hat. And so maybe it's just that it doesn't stand out as much that it's slightly beyond vertical.
Yeah. It's, with all due respect to marketers out there, that could be just marketing copy at that point.
Yeah.
But because truly there's no such thing as beyond vertical. But again, it's just marketing jargon at this point. Exactly. Wave turn was really good. That 0G stall, the second inversion, where you're upside down for almost a full 2 seconds and you're just flying along the track at this point. That was really cool because that was a really interesting sensation. I think a really underrated part is the last element right before the brake run, which is the sideways airtime hill where you kind of get the sideways ejector and floater at the same time. It really, really was a interesting feeling and unlike anything I've ever experienced on a roller coaster before. But I think for me, the biggest surprise was the reverse launch, and there is an airtime hill built into this launch. Mm-hmm. And so as you come down vertically off the top hat, you come straight down, your gravity, you can't see where you're going, obviously, because you're traveling backwards. But you hit this airtime hill, and physics, you're just flying through the air in a way that you're not used to it. Obviously, we've all been through airtime where it's floater ejector, you see what's happening. You've got the bottom of the hill coming where you will come back down to earth, such as it is. But as you hit this airtime hill in reverse, it's just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Am I ever going to come back down to my seat? And then to come down and immediately go all the way back up to that vertical spike as you hit that moment of weightlessness up at the top of the hill. It was crazy. I was just shaking my head at that point. I was like, what just happened? So I think that was really good. But yeah, I think just start to finish, Pantheon has a series of really, really good elements that you've never really seen at Busch Gardens Williamsburg before. I think obviously it's a park that's got a lot of firsts. It's got Loch Ness Monster with its interlocking loops. It had Alpengeist, which is the world's tallest B&M, might still be. I don't think it is anymore. I think Banshee might have taken, but it was the tallest B&M invert for a while and was the first floorless dive coaster, things like that. I mean, it's there's a lot of stuff that goes on at Busch Gardens, but again, Pantheon is another way of them just continuing to push the envelope, I feel like, for, new roller coasters and thrills and, continuing to reinvent the roller coaster wheel a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, it's a good addition to an already very good coaster lineup. I'll also say that, luckily on my day, if you go on a slow day, it did not have very long line. Well, it also didn't open when the park first opened. We're still doing some maintenance checks on it. And that had kind of a long line at the beginning of the day. That's obviously where lots of people ran. But late in the day on a relatively slow weekday, it was down to, 5-10 minute waits, which everything in the park was, but it was not like it was a crazy long wait. So hopefully if you go there on a light day, it's easy to get on.
Yeah, I think we're getting into the point of the year though where the light days are going to start to be fewer and further between. Obviously, I know school's getting ready to get out most places, and even the weekdays in the summer they're a little bit more packed than those days early in the season where, you get 6 hours of operation, but you get a good chunk of your day done because you're the only one there.
Yeah. I did see there were lots of people on rides operators being trained while I was there. So they're hopefully also working on staffing up. So you also earlier, or I guess about a month ago, went on another new ride in Virginia, Tumbili at King's Dominion.
I did.
right?
Yeah, that was the Friday of my trip, and I actually had some work up in the Richmond area that weekend. So Friday afternoon, I left early in the morning on Friday, and I got to Kings Dominion in the afternoon. It was one of those days. The park closed at like 5 o'clock, and I had like 4 or 5 hours, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get up there. I'm going to do this. And listeners of this podcast will remember right before our kind of extended break, we had a episode with Bridget Bywater and Tony Turner and Chef Dennis Callanan, Kings Dominion, talking about Jungle X-Pedition and kind of what was going on ahead of the upcoming season. And, you know, as coaster enthusiasts, again, we've seen these kind of off the shelf models, the SNS 4D free spin. To me, Tumbili, it's the smaller of the two versions. Obviously, there's the one that's at a lot of the Six Flags parks, known as Joker. I think it's Batman the Ride at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. We've ridden them, and they're fun. But I've got to say, Tumbili kind of shocked me a little bit because as the smaller model, you're not thinking that the thrills are going to be there, or the thrills are going to be, kind of compressed into this smaller area. But I actually prefer the smaller model, which is, Tumbili or Dragon Slayer at Adventureland in Iowa, because again, with the equilibrium that I have, which is just rapidly deteriorating as the more roller coasters I ride, you don't have the opportunity to flip up and down as much. And again, hitting the park on a weekday, limited hours, I walked on to Tumbili and then was able to just stay on the train. And there was a guy I recognized. I think he's from the Coaster Talk podcast. His name's Timmy. So if he happens to listen to this, shout out to him. He was my ride op that day, commented on my Coaster101 shirt. So shout out to Timmy. But, I rode, as I boarded, I rode it on the right side of the coaster. So it was the side that faces like the Eiffel Tower in the parking lot, as opposed to faces Intimidator 305. And I rode on, as I was boarding, I boarded the right side. So I was facing backwards. But I was facing backwards on the lift hill, and then would, obviously go up because it goes vertical and flips over, but I was facing forwards and then facing reverse. And the elements on that ride, they're great. And I still haven't figured it out. I know there's an article on the site that kind of talks about how the 4D free spin works and how each coaster has its own magnetic place where things flip and don't flip. And I don't know if it happened because I was just riding as a single rider. I don't know what was happening on the other side of the track, but there was no one else to really weigh anything down, and I was trying to kind of control my own spin, and that didn't work. But the whole area, I mean, Tumbili is one of the best themed off-the-shelf coasters I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's got the bright green track, but the supports are painted like bamboo, and it's this bright yellow bamboo. And if you've been visiting Kings Dominion for the last 2 years, you've seen them in the parking lot and on the Dominator exit platform. So you knew it was coming, but seeing it kind of in person really just, it has breathed so much life into that new Jungle X-Pedition area, which again, when we saw it in early April, when the park opened, there were still, the new restaurant hadn't opened yet. And I think it's getting ready to open if it hasn't already. And the new store hadn't opened yet, but the new theming was just constantly updating. And I've seen pictures from the park in the last couple of weeks that were completely different from when I was there in early April. But this new area of the park is just stunning. To be honest, it was a really disconnected area for a number of years because you had Avalanche, which was themed to Olympic bobsledding, which has nothing to do with safaris. And then you had the Scrambler, which was just known as Scrambler. And, I don't really know how you make a Scrambler themed or anything like that, but certainly Scramble and Safari don't really have any connect there. But even just like renaming, repainting, and the Avalanche is now reptilian, and they've added just like little touches of theming throughout the coaster.
Yeah.
Even in the brake run, there's like expedition gear, explorer gear, headlamps, things like that, and it's things that you've noticed going to this park for years that they really have. Every stone has been like, no stone was left unturned basically on this. And the scrambler, same thing. The process of being rethemed to arachnidia, I finally said that right. It's taken me an entire month to do that, but the whole area of Jungle X-Pedition has just breathed so much life into that park. And when they get their new show going, it's amazing what they did with this one coaster that everyone was convinced was going to replace Volcano, and then didn't replace Volcano and replaced just the top spin ride that the spin and puke.
I wasn't sure what it had replaced, but the top spins.
Yeah, it was the
long lost top spins at all of these old premier parks that are now gone.
Yeah, the Paramount Tomb Raider era was known as Tomb Raider Firefall at one point, and then it was just the very generic The Crypt. Again, Crypt, nothing to do with safaris, but it's just such a welcomed facelift, and the atmosphere, the music, even the food in the area. I mean, the new I don't even know, Jungle X-Pedition cafe or eatery,
we'll call it Jungle X-Pedition Snacks, is I think what we'll call it for now.
Yeah, well, it's the new restaurant that used to be Outer Hanks and used to be Bubblegum Shrimp Company, but that wasn't open. But I tried their new like French fry stand, which is known as Excavator Taters, because I'm a sucker for loaded fries, and these barbecue fries that they put out, I'd put them up against any theme park meal anywhere. It was so good. So I'm thrilled to kind of get back to King's Dominion sometime later this year, hopefully, if not sometime next season, just to see this new show and kind of how that theming has continued to evolve. But to me is very interesting, and I'm going to go back now to Pantheon for a little bit. And this is not a negative, but Busch Gardens created this brand new custom built top of the line Intamin roller coaster, all these custom elements. There's no theming. Whereas an hour up 64 and a little bit on 95, King's Dominion has this coaster that is, a dozen models that exist around the world, and an exact clone exists in Iowa. But it is so heavily themed, and they both accomplish what they were trying to do so well. And it was really, really cool to be able to kind of experience both these parks in back-to-back days, and kind of, especially as places that I will call my home away from home park, to kind of see the new life that we've been waiting for multiple years at this point to be breathed into both of these places.
Cool. I will, next time I find myself in Virginia, we'll have to also make a stop at King's Dominion.
I think so. Was there anything else at your Busch Gardens visit that, stood out or was notable to you?
I was there it was the first day of their food and wine festival, which I think runs through the beginning of June, maybe. So I got to try a bunch of good bites. There are lots of different stands. A couple of them were having some technical issues, so they weren't all open. But overall, the food I had was all pretty solid. There were some things that were like not super interesting. They were fine. And then there were other ones that were more exciting. I think the best stuff I had was probably there was at the Brazil stand. The steak at the Brazil stand probably had the most punch of flavor, and they were at least finishing them on the grill freshly. It was soon. So this is only the second time I've been to Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and it's one of my favorite parks based on the first time I went. they're like, even I appreciate how much like they did even with these little food stands. They're all representing different parts of the world that aren't already in the park. Of like, they had speaker systems at all of them, so they were all playing music from whatever country or region the parks were from. Um, and like, I feel like Busch Gardens Williamsburg does a really good job with little touches like that, like little bits of theming. It's interesting comparing the theming of Tumbili to Pantheon, where in general, I think Busch Gardens Williamsburg is one of the best themed parks there is. And I agree that Pantheon they obviously do what Busch Gardens does a lot with their rides, of like, it's using lots of the natural terrain and the trees and the river and stuff to it. But yeah, there's not a ton of like extra theming around it. But yeah, so the food festival was solid. I would go. I would try more if you happen to be going to the park. It was a good way to take breaks between things. I'm reminded that my favorite coaster at that park is for Bolton. And someday, I think we will do an episode where I know there's a post from a few years ago on the website about where we make an argument about why each of us have a different favorite ride at that park. Someday we'll do an episode about that. I will say, sad, my only disappointment was that Alpengeist was closed. I assume that is probably like staffing related issues, but everything else was the operations were all solid, which was something that I'd heard some of these parks had been having issues with staffing over the like sort of early season. But I didn't really have that experience this time, so it was solid. Yeah, still one of my favorite parks. Need to get out to the East Coast more often to visit it.
Yeah, and I think that article is funny because at the time we had 7 riders, and each of the riders took a different favorite, and it was able to coherently argue as to why it was their favorite, or like the must-do attraction at the park. Yeah. So again, Pantheon only adds to that. And
maybe this is a question: is Pantheon? Does Pantheon is it at the top or close to the top of your Busch Gardens coaster list?
Based on my one ride, yes. But that could be recency bias. I will always stand up for Invader as probably my favorite coaster at the park, if not the most underrated wooden roller coaster out there. You know, there are a good number of underrated wooden coasters, and this, again, like you mentioned, we're gonna have to dive into this topic another time because we've been talking a little bit here. But Invader is like, it packs such a punch for such a small coaster, and that first drop with the head chopper under the log flume and the airtime hills and things like that, GCI and Skyline Attractions and everybody behind that ride, they knocked it out of the park with just a small, really fun, unassuming, really good coaster for families and younger coaster enthusiasts. But they were able to hit the nail on the head for enthusiasts as well.
Does Pantheon take its spot?
Yes, I mean, Pantheon to me is the best It is, and honestly, it's tough because for years my favorite coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg was Apollo's Chariot, followed right behind Griffin, and now it's like, having ridden Fury and a bunch of other B&M hypers, it kind of has fallen off a little bit, but it's still, to me, if I had to pick a top 4 there, would be Pantheon, Invader, Griffin, Apollo's Chariot. And then, Verbolten eventually, whatever. It'll come on the list. But it's always fun riding Verbolten with people on the train who have no idea what's coming.
Yeah.
And I don't know, are we at the point of where we can talk about the
probably secret? But we should save all of this discussion for a future episode.
You're right.
So I'm cutting you off, Andrew.
That's fair. I could wax poetic about Busch Gardens Williamsburg all day. Yeah. So again,
we're gonna do eventually.
Let's grab the crew and we will do an episode about our favorite. We do that for a lot of parks, actually.
Yeah.
All right. Free content. Here we go. Let's do it. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Coaster 101 podcast. If you've listened to this podcast and you didn't know we had a website, we do. It is coaster101.com. We've got a lot of really good articles, news, reviews, interviews, our thoughts on the industry and things like that. So if you prefer your content to come in a written medium, go check that out. We are also on social media, all the social medias at Coaster 101. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've even gotten a little bit more active on TikTok recently. So wherever you consume Coaster social media, go find us. We're at Coaster 101. If you're listening and you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to go give us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. We obviously love those 5-star reviews and ratings. A big thank you, as always, to Justin Mabry of JM Music Design for our theme music. And we will talk to y'all again soon. See ya.
Bye.